seat. We're about to start. My name is Robert Harrison. I'm past president of NCECA, and I'm very pleased to be able to introduce Ben Culbertson and Harvey Weigle that are going to talk to you today about their second generation veggie oil kiln. The first generation of the kiln, Ben was a contributor to the Sustainable Ceramics book, which I authored a couple of years ago, and has been an active member of the Green Task Force here at NCECA. Has really made a tremendous contribution to the field, and you'll get exposed today to his second generation endeavor. So without further ado, I'll introduce Ben, and thanks for being here. Please turn off your cell phones or put them on mute, and we'll get started.
Thank you very much, Robert.
Thank you.
I'm going to hold Robert up here just for a second, hold him hostage. So we're going to talk about a kiln that uses no off-grid energy. But before we do that, I want to acknowledge the fact that we need people like Robert, heroes, leaders, pioneers, to lead the way. Robert wrote the first book on sustainable ceramics, was one of the original founders of the Green Task Force, which is a sustainability arm of NCECA. So will you please give Robert a thank you, applause for the hard work he's done. Be sure to go see Robert at the Green Task Force booth, which is T91. Another thing I want to do is acknowledge an important contributor before we get too far into it. B&Z Materials is a brick company located in Pennsylvania, and they've been big donors for this project. We couldn't have done it without them. They've given us big discounts on bricks, so we really thank them. Also thank the Green Task Force, because this group of people has been really dedicated, meeting every NCECA and talking about things that can further the goal of green and sustainable ways of working in ceramics. I also want to thank my own university briefly. The Shippensburg University has an undergraduate research program, and maybe your university has an undergraduate research program too. If they do, you have to go talk to them because this is how our project was funded over the last many years. We started in 2009, have been submitting grant requests about every other year to this. This is the only way that we were able to make this project happen, along with donations of B&Z. So find out if you've got undergraduate research. Undergraduate research is meant to include the creative arts. It's not just for scientists. So there's a national organization that kind of oversees undergraduate programs, but it also will do graduate work too. So if they have that program, you should be tapping into that for resources. I'd also like to introduce my student colleague. This is Harvey Weigle. He's been lead student on this project for the last 2 years. He and I are going to be talking about this project together. I'm going to show you a quick intro video.
Here you can see I'm adjusting the solar panel, the solar array, to track the sun. Here, this is our solar preheater. This heats our fuel up and helps mitigate cold temperatures, problems with cold temperatures.
Just an old water heater tank painted black. 150 degrees is what we're getting in that tank. Amazing.
That's the fuel line. That's the fuel line running into our burner system.
And we're going to pass off here, come inside the kiln shed. Here's the inverter. This is the device that converts the 12-volt battery power to 120, so it'll work with burners. This is called the charge controller to help us monitor battery level, what's coming in and what's going out.
This is the battery bank. This is what is fueling our burners, charging.
These are deep cycle batteries. You get them at Walmart, 99 bucks. That's the roar of the burner. We're approaching cone 10. Some of the gadgets we attach to the burners to make it easier to work with, pressure gauges and so on. We scavenged this stainless steel pipe from the dumpster, like most of the components. Reduce, reuse, repurpose. Second burner. Listen to that, that sounds great. We just recently added,
We just added an oxy probe. We were just wondering for that here recently. It's what we use to measure our atmosphere for reduction glazes. We're still working on that, but we're on track. And then here you can see Ben opening up the kiln to cone 10. It's starting to drop.
wait for it, wait for it, wait. Here it comes, wait, wait, wait. There it is. See it? What is biodiesel? It's actually a fuel that's really similar to regular fossil fuel diesel made typically out of French fry oil. So here's an image that shows you the cooking oil that's been used. You ate your French fries, your fried onion rings, and once it's reacted with a chemical called potassium hydroxide, it causes it to split into two components, fatty acid methyl ester, FAME for short, and a component at the bottom called glycerin. We're not going to talk a whole lot about the making of biodiesel and the chemistry of it because that's another topic. Lots of online resources that you can go to. And then on the right-hand side is the biodiesel that's been purified. So any excess methanol, any excess glycerin or catalyst has been removed, so it's nice and clear. And this is pure enough to run through your car. But we can use raw biodiesel,
Yes,
Harley has discovered, in the kiln, which is a real big advantage. We'll talk about that in a second. So eat those French fries, because we need them to make our work. I also want to talk about the idea that universities and colleges are the perfect place for this experiment, for this laboratory. There's a good chance that the college or university where you are currently teaching or enrolled has a biodiesel program already. If they do, go talk to them. Go talk to them. This is the perfect inroad into a biodiesel-fired, vegetable oil-fired kiln. Now you can collect your own, but if they've already got the setup, why not tap into that? So this is an example of a school just up the road from us, Dickinson College, which is really well known for its sustainability initiatives. In Carlisle, Pennsylvania, they got a nice corner of the facilities building to do their biodiesel. But here's full disclosure. We're not the first off-grid kiln. Wood firers have been off-grid for a long time. So we acknowledge that we're not the first off-grid kiln, and you really don't want to piss off the wood firers. We also have to acknowledge the fact that we're not the first to use vegetable oil. There are a lot of other artists that have used veggie oil, and many others have joined the ranks of veggie firers, and we've learned a lot from these people. And we hope that more of you will be adopting this as one other way, one other prong of the approach to firing that's more sustainable. Let me also talk about the realities of pricing. So when we started doing this project around 2009, natural gas was at a multi-year high, over $13 per million BTU. That's the standard unit of measure. And now it's about $3.50. So you might be asking, like, why even bother if it's that cheap? And of course, you know that just because natural gas is really cheap doesn't mean that climate change is stopping. It still marches on. So here's the latest measure in parts per million of carbon in the atmosphere, 406 as of February 2017. So this inexorable upward climb is not slowing down anymore. So are we just going to let it happen and just say that we don't really have any role to play? We think we should have a role. Biodiesel has a much better emissions profile than fossil fuel diesel does on almost every level, with the exception of something called nitrogen oxides. So here's a general graph that shows you much lower in terms of CO2, much lower in terms of zero sulfates. In other words, we're not putting sulfur into the atmosphere, which adds to acid rain problems. So it's much better in general. This is a chart based on auto biodiesel. The other thing we should mention too is that, veggie-fired stuff is different. How many of you might have bought organic food in the last month? Show your hands.
Wow.
Gee whiz, that's a lot of you. So when you bought organic, what you were saying is you were voting with your dollars to support enriching the soil.
You were asking for a change.
Asking for change, essentially. So you were using your consumer power to change things. So it's possible that firing with vegetable fuel could be a real advantage in terms of selling your work, potentially. So consider that. The other thing I want to mention is that this is a sustainable initiative. And virtually every college and university has a sustainability office. Go talk to them. Tag on to the sustainability initiative. There's going to be grant money attached to those initiatives. There's going to be people that know how to write grants. There's going to be ways to incorporate this into the bigger umbrella of sustainable practices at your school. So absolutely, figure out ways to get connected with sustainability departments on your campus. So Harley's going to talk next about some of the early motivations, like, how did we wind up doing this?
Thank you. As I'm sure you know, biodiesel has been used in vehicles for quite some period of time. Something that I'm not sure that you guys do know is that there are people that do use it to heat their homes as well. There's a man right here that does. So it was natural for us to think that maybe we can take this biofuel and use it to heat our kilns as well.
So what's a BTU content of biodiesel compared to?
The BTU content of biodiesel is 125,000. It's only 8% less than that of a regular diesel.
So it's virtually the same, not a huge difference in terms of energy content.
So that's exactly what we did. We took an oil furnace burner and hooked it up to a little test kiln that we built. And guess what? It worked, and it worked great.
It was easy.
It fired in
Too
like
easy.
3 hours at cone 10. You can even see 11 is dropping as well. With this knowledge, we kind of began kicking around ideas, and something else that we were wondering was, can we get this off-grid further? And with that, we tested it with a battery.
We just pulled a battery out of a car, hooked it up with a cheap inverter.
And that worked too. It was super simple.
So now we start thinking big. We're getting really excited. So we get this grant. We decide we're going to start to build the veggie kiln.
Yep, Veggie 1.0. There was a lot of ideas going around with Veggie 1.0. We like to call it the Franken kiln.
So we were so excited, we were thinking, like, what all can we do? So we tried to do a lot of things with this first veggie kiln, and I'll touch on a few of the things we were trying to do with this. But I think ultimately we over-designed it a bit. So we decided when we did Veggie 2.0 to start focusing in, simplify the design, and really focus in on a couple of key priorities. One is we wanted it to be easier to fire, and we wanted it to be more efficient, and we wanted it also to be easier to adopt so that you guys could replicate this idea. So by the time we were done with those changes, we dropped fuel consumption by over 30%. We started out using about 20 to 22 gallons of fuel. By the time we were finished, we were doing it between 10 and 15 gallons of fuel. That's a major change, isn't it? The first firing was 10 gallons. We were stunned, weren't we?
Yeah, we even did one with 9 as well.
And what?
We even did one with 9 gallons of fuel.
And 9 gallons even. So it's possible to really reduce the fuel usage and by extension, get off the grid. So here's a couple of things that we eliminated. I want to show these just so that you might put this into your computer and think about ways that you might use it. Just because we eliminated it doesn't mean that it couldn't be used in another application. We were doing something called recuperative heat with a regenerative blower. We pulled hot air off the stack and piped it back into the burner ports. And that 400 or 500 degree air was supposed to really improve combustion because heated air works better in terms of combustion. But we also found out that it tended to produce an oxidizing atmosphere. So we could take it up to body reduction with the regenerative blower, with the recuperative air. But after that, we had to turn it off. And it draws quite a bit of power because it's like a 2 amp blower or 4 amp blower, I think it is. So we thought, well, this is maybe not worth it. We're not using it that much during the firing, so we took that out. We also took out the drip plate system. And I know some people do use drip plate systems. So this is one of the things that made the kiln a little more complex than it needed to be. We were doing multi-fuel with this. We had drip plate system with regular raw vegetable oil, WVO as it's called. But we also had a biodiesel burner, so we blocked off 2 holes. And then we also had propane burners. So we're trying to make it work with a bunch of different fuels. So we lost some efficiency in the process by having so many holes poked in the kiln. We also found that the drip system was hard to fire. We had to babysit it the whole time, 12, 13 hours, adjusting the needle valves to make sure that the stream was right. We also had to drip in water. We also had to build a structure to hold the water tank and the fuel, and we had to have a separate heated tank for the fuel, and there were cold weather problems because it cooled off as it went through the tubes. So it is possible to do that. And you could, if you focus just on that, you could really make a kiln that worked great. But we found that it was just too much extra complexity. We also did test a burner that runs on compressed air, and this is industry standard to use compressed air with 1 to 100% WVO. So we hooked up compressed air. We used a special nozzle for compressed air. It produced what I would call a weak flame. It didn't work as well as we'd hoped. Because we didn't get any real early success with that, we said, well, number one, it takes a heat element to heat up the oil to 180. It's using an air compressor, which draws a lot of amperage. Again, these are extra electric inputs that would make it harder to do a solar array to satisfy those electrical requirements. So we eliminated that, and we focused primarily on this really commonly available furnace burner that many of you probably still have in your house. Now, I had started making biodiesel in 2006 and started heating with it around 2008. So my house is heated with biodiesel. And when we put this in, we noticed that burner pot that you see there in this slide has a mesh stainless steel cylinder on the inside. It's called the catalyst. And you see it glowing orange. If I took that catalyst out of the burner pot, the flame was really squirrely. It just kind of like swirled around, and it was inefficient. It was longer. So for some reason, this thing was really improving the flame shape when it went in there. And the theory is that once it heats up to red, it creates a lot of extra heated surface upon which that fuel and air mix to burn on. So it's actually kind of extra charcoal, you might say, to keep things really burning hot in there. So we modified that idea by taking a piece of perforated stainless steel and sticking it inside the blast tube of the furnace burner. So here's what it looks like when it's in the burner. And we just use these bolts to create standouts to hold it in the center there. And you can see the spray nozzle there at the very center of that. This is what it looks like on the outside after several firings, so it oxidizes. And then we also put on an extended blast tube onto it. Every burner comes with a tube on it, but we made a longer tube on it. The logic behind that was that because this vegetable fuel does not contain volatile elements like fossil fuels do, it needs extra resident time to fully blend with air. So we extended blast tube, and we found we got better looking flames. So this is one thing that's a little confusing about using biofuels. The flame on the right there, number 4, this is your typical blue flame from using natural gas or propane. We tend to see flames that look more like 1 and 2 when we're firing with biodiesel. At best, sort of purpley flames at the tip and lots of yellow. And that's a little bit deceiving when you first start using the fuel because you think, oh my God, I'm reducing all the time. But Harley's going to talk about flame tests that we've done and what we've learned from those series of tests.
So this was a series of flame testing that we did. What we were really looking for was a nice compact flame that was symmetrical. On this first test, we can see that there's no extended blast tube and there's no catalyst in there. So it's
that's the way it came right from the factory, right?
Yeah, yes sir, yep. Take notice of the flame. It's real long, it's kind of squirrely, and there's some white smoke coming off there too. And that white smoke is signaling us that there's a little bit of incomplete combustion going on. The next test here, we had the extended blast tube attached to that factory blast tube, and take notice of the change of the flame. It's still a little bit wide, and there's some white smoke coming off, but there is some improvements there, so that does really illustrate the benefits of having that extended blast tube on. And as I said, there is a little bit of white smoke coming off. I'm not sure if you guys can see that.
But there's no
that's-
catalyst in this right now, right?
Yeah, there's no catalyst.
Okay.
That's still illustrating incomplete combustion. This next slide, here we have, you can see the tip of the catalyst coming out of that extended blast tube. And here, the flame really, it really perked up. It was symmetrical. It's not as wide anymore. It's narrow, and it's compact. That catalyst is acting, it's giving it more surface area for fuel to combust as it's coming out of the burner.
It's a little wider too, seems like, doesn't it?
Yeah, yes, sir. Okay, full disclosure. This next series of testing that we did was the most complex part for the burner system. There's dozens and dozens and dozens of
Mind-boggling.
nozzles. There's 3 components to the nozzles. There's gallon per hour. There's wide ranges of gallon per hour, and then there's the spray, the angle of the spray from 70 degrees to 45 degrees to 30 degrees. It ranges
It actually goes
widely.
up to 80 and 90 even.
Yes. And then there's also, there's solid spray, there's a semi-solid spray, there's hollow sprays, and then on top of all that, you have all different name
Totally
brands.
confusing. Totally
Yeah.
confusing. So that's like just a sampling of all the different numbers and lettering systems on those nozzles.
But there's good news. There's still good news left with that, and that's that we have done a lot of testing. We've done dozens and dozens of testing to find out what works best. So if this is something that you guys are interested in pursuing, there's a baseline for you to start out. There's not a big of learning curve that we had when we initially started.
So you don't have to reinvent the wheel.
Here you can see this is 3 nozzle testings that we did out of the dozens that I had mentioned before. Take notice of how different that is though. The top left, or top right picture, excuse me, or top left.
Top left.
Yeah, my fault. That's a nicer looking flame. It's a little more symmetrical, it's not as long, and it's compact. And then compare that to the bottom. That flame is really squirrely, and then the top right, excuse me, I'm sorry. That's a little more squirrely and not something that we're looking for. I have a close-up of those 3 images as well, and this is where the catalyst really plays a part. On the top left image, the catalyst is nice and cherry. That extra heat and surface area is really allowing for complete combustion.
You also notice how it kind of hugs the center
Yeah,
too
yeah.
of the blast tube, not quite filling out around the outside edges there.
It's much more compact and symmetrical. And then take a look at the bottom. That's a complete opposite of what we're seeing from that top left. The catalyst it's dark. It's not offering much of anything. So you can see where nozzle selection makes a big difference.
Huge difference. It really does determine the shape of the flame and how much BTUs are going in the kiln.
Now I have an added bonus for you. This is testing that we actually did just last weekend, and we've added it in this presentation. While we were doing our research, we kept seeing something called the swirler that was used in industry standard waste vegetable oil burners. And Ben, would you
And
like to?
conversions too, right?
Yes, yes. Would
So
you like to
yeah, the
explain that?
swirler, you notice it's got fins on it. It looks a little bit like a kind of reverse fan. So when air is pushed through those fins, it spins through the tube like this and actually helps to blend the fuel and air mix better. We were really surprised with the results. Take a look at the next slide.
This is our assembly that we've done for the swirler, and this is like everything else on our kiln. This is made from found objects. This was actually an aluminum sign that the university had disposed of that we've taken and repurposed
We just
wonderfully.
repurposed it all.
Yeah, we've made 2 swirlers.
It's
out of
not
this.
hard to make. We're not going to spend a huge amount of time on the construction process, but this will be on the website too. That'll be at the end of the presentation.
Yes, and then this is the swirler inside that extended blast tube. It just fits right on top of the factory blast tube. Take notice to the picture on the right, how the light swirls in there. That's essentially the idea that we're getting.
So you get an idea of how the air is going to come through it at a diagonal.
And here's a picture of it in use. For some reason, we could just not get a good picture anywhere with these.
I know the
with these
camera couldn't
testings.
quite capture it. It looked really interesting, but the camera wouldn't lock it into the right frame. This is about as close as we could get.
Yes, and we've superimposed some lines on here, so that way you guys can kind of see those diagonal lines. That
Can you see that kind of propensity for that flame to be slightly diagonal? So we got a video?
yes, yes, sir. Hopefully, in this video, you can see the action of it. Look at the very tip of the extended blast tube there. You can really see the mixture and the swirl of the flame. It made a huge difference. In person, It looks a little hazy here, but in person, that difference in the action of the flame was tremendous.
It really brightened it up. The flame seemed much brighter, a little more transparent towards the tip, which meant we're getting a little cleaner burn. And ultimately just made a really hot flame, we thought. I mean, we're really excited. We haven't even had a chance to fire a kiln with it yet, but I think it's making a big difference.
Yeah, and that's something we're gonna do as soon as we come back from this conference.
It doesn't look quite as compact, though, as the earlier flame, but we think it's a better flame. I think it's a more efficient flame, ultimately.
We noticed some blues and purples at the very tip of the flame. It was a little more clear, so that's all indicating a hotter flame than what we had previously. And then next, we're going to talk about some of the modifications that we made on our oil furnace burners. Okay.
So we've done some things that are pretty easy to install, but they really make using this burner a whole lot easier. I'll go through them one by one. Every oil burner comes with a control unit that's basically a computer-controlled unit. You want to remove it because it goes through shutdown sequences and you got to wait. And it's all designed for safety for people that are using them for home furnaces. We don't need that as a kiln burner. Take it off. Also connected to the control unit is a solenoid valve, typically, that opens and closes when the control unit says it's okay. We took that off too and just plugged it with a cork. High tech. And then we also added a quick connect onto the fuel line. These are hydraulic connections, which means when you take them apart, they don't dribble all over the place or drain out onto your shoes. Or pick up gunk and stuff. So this is a really worthwhile investment, is to put these quick connects on there. We put a valve on the return line, and the return line is something we're experimenting with. If we have a higher gallon per hour nozzle, we may be able to open the return line up, which sends some fuel back to the original tank. It'll help warm up the tank. We're still working on that. And then we also put we repositioned the air disc. So from the factory, these things are preset for air. So you need to go adjust the air intakes on there to make it work for this particular fuel. So we closed the air disc. I'll show you how to do that next slide. Excuse me. We added a pressure gauge, as mentioned before. Really important to be able to see if the pump is producing the right amount of pressure. We had some pumps that were only producing 100 PSI. We needed around 140 PSI for the best atomization. And then we also installed a double wall heat shield to keep the heat off the burner itself. Here's the air disc. This pops off really easy. 2 bolts hold it on with the pump. Pull the pump off, and then that disc rotates. So you can rotate it until it's very, very close to close. We left about a 1/4 inch gap on there. And then the air ring, which you see back here, is the main air control. So we can slide that up and down and control the air going in there. And you can even put marks on it if you want to repeat the air position. So the next big innovation was blending waste oil and biofuel. So Harley's going to take a look at that.
One of the reasons, there's 3 reasons that we thought of that we were influenced by to blend our fuels. One is that it was using less biodiesel, of course, when we were blending the waste vegetable oil with it. And with that, we have less inputs, not as many chemicals are being used for the processing of biodiesel, and then we have more time to be in the studio as well, and less electric inputs.
It also makes it easier.
Yes. Secondly, it got us away from the compressed air burner that waste vegetable oil needs. So it allowed us to fire start to finish with waste vegetable oil in that mixture.
Can I add something?
Yes, sir.
So straight vegetable oil, straight WVO as they say it, needs compressed air to burn completely. So we're just short of doing it with 100% vegetable oil. So we're trying to avoid going to the compressed air nozzles because of all the extra energy inputs.
And the other thing that we mentioned before is we found that we can use raw biodiesel with this. And Ben, what exactly is raw biodiesel?
So raw biodiesel, Harley, is biodiesel that still has impurities in it. It still has some excess glycerin, excess methanol, excess moisture perhaps, maybe a little bit of the potassium hydroxide. So it's something you wouldn't want to run through your car, but the kiln doesn't care. It'll chew it up. And it means, of course, less processing.
Yeah. We don't need fuel that's got the capabilities of going through the car. We can just throw it right in. And here we have our hillbilly testing protocol. We rated the kitchen cabinets for our mason jars. And we measured up to 400 milliliters. We mixed in 5% increments of waste vegetable oil and biodiesel. And then after we had all of our mason jars filled up with the blends, we use a common paint viscosimeter. And what we would do is I would lower the viscosimeter into the mix after making it homogeneous. And then I would say go, take it out, and Ben would time it. And then when I said stop, as it depleted, he would stop it. And then we recorded our results. We ended up doing these tests twice, one at room temperature and then again at 120 degrees Fahrenheit. Here's the findings to our results, or our
data.
testing. We took this and then converted it to a graph for easier reading. When we first started, we had hypothesized that we could use a 50-50 blend in our burners. And we were basing that off of the viscosity of regular biodiesel, which is about 12.5 seconds. With that findings, at room temperature, we found that we could use 50-50 mix.
Pretty easy.
Yeah, so we could even use a 45 to 55. And then also take notice on the right-hand side of the slide, there's a black box. And inside that black box, that's biodiesel by itself at its viscosity and then waste vegetable oil. On the waste vegetable oil, the blue line is indicating the viscosity at room temperature. And heated up to 120 degrees, it had a tremendous drop.
It's a huge drop. So the bottom line is it doesn't take that much heat to reduce the viscosity of the vegetable oil, which makes that solar preheater that we showed you early much more important, particularly if you're firing in cold weather, but also if you're using blends.
The next series of testing we did was with raw biodiesel and waste vegetable oil. We found a lot of the same results, but one correlation that we thought was really interesting was the 30% mix with 70% waste vegetable oil. At a heated temperature, we found that the viscosity of that was relatively similar to that of biodiesel at room temperature.
That got me excited.
We got very excited. We actually took that mason jar straight out and went out to our burners and hooked it up with a line, and we fired it right away. And we actually have a video of that.
70% WVO in a regular furnace burner.
Not quite as forceful, is it?
It's a little squirrely, maybe not quite as nice as a pure biodiesel, but it's manageable. We think we can probably tweak it by playing around with the nozzle size,
A little more smoke.
a little bit of white smoke still, but that's, to us, that was a pretty big step.
Is there a mist going on the end, too?
Okay, adding solar. This was our next step in getting the kiln further off the grid.
So I want to just go through the main components here and show you, it's a pretty simple system. This is a 400-watt solar array. We built the frame out of scavenged materials, perforated square tube. And then we also built this solar thermal collector out of scrap materials. Some of it I picked up on a trip to a college that my daughter was looking at. Figured nobody would know me there. So the sun hits the reflectors, bounces into this black painted box and holds that heat in there. And it's amazing how much energy you get out. About 1,000 watts per square meter is what you get out of the sun. So this is, I'm sure, about 1,000 watts. And this is almost 150 degrees. The day that we did this measurement and shot the pictures, it was 17 degrees in the morning. And by afternoon, the tank was at around 150. So we built the rack out of that perforated metal. We also want to alert you to the fact that people like solar panels, so they steal them sometimes. So our first set of solar panels were stolen right off campus. Set us back an entire year. That's how long it took to get the money to retry it. So here I have a student who's drilling holes in the solar panels, and we ran cabling, metal cabling through all the panels, lashed it onto the rack, locked it on there, put signs that said dog guard, guard dog, sorry, that's a dyslexic slip there. On the back of the panels is the spec sheet there. It tells you these are 100-watt panels. It tells you what the voltage coming out of it is. So the next question is like, how big do you make these? The real important thing to know is what do the burners need in terms of watts? So the easy way to find out what the burners need was to attach a device called the kilowatt. So here's a picture of what that looks like. So you just plug your device, in this case the burner, into the kilowatt and then attach the power to it. And when we turn the blower on and the pump on at the same time and the igniter, it pulled 234 watts. So that's the energy requirement on startup. As soon as we turned the igniter off, it dropped down to 188. So we're looking at lower than 200 watts per burner to run it. So with those numbers, then we do a little bit of math. Did I say math? So we've got two burners. They each needed about 190 watts. We add that up and we get about 300. Hey, wait, is math wrong on that? 370 watts when they're running normally. And here's the only formula you need to remember: amps times volts equal watts. And from there, we knew that on previous firings, it took about 5 to 6 hours to fire the kiln. So we needed to be able to produce 370 watts per hour for 6 hours for it to fire the kiln off properly. So we were then going to figure out, well, how much juice is in the battery? So off the label of the battery, we determined that the batteries hold 105 amp hours. So we're going to convert amp hours to watt hours. So here's where you find that label, right on the battery there, 105 amp hours. These are deep cycle batteries. There's 3 of them. Hence, we get 315 amp hours multiplied by 12 volts because they're wired in parallel, which means you get 12 volts. Gives us 3,780 watts total. And then we're going to divide by the burner needs, 370. So 3,780 by 370 gives us 10.2 hours of operation. But we don't want to discharge the batteries to 0 because when you do that, you really shorten the life of the battery. The ideal is to discharge them no more than 50%. So depth of discharge is the terminology. So if we take that same number, divide by 50% or cut it in half, essentially, we get a 5.1 hour rating at 370 watts per hour. Now, our firings were taken between 5 and 6 hours. We're in the ballpark. Yay. So we had fired a few times where we were going a little bit below the 50% level, but we were running straight off the battery bank. And we weren't firing during daylight hours. But when we fired later, as I will show you, we did it, and I'll explain how. So there's the charge controller. Gives us a readout. Right now, the solar panels are pumping juice in at 13.8 volts, and they're also pumping juice out to the burners. So we're able to monitor the level of the batteries. A little smiley face on the battery there tells us it's happy. The inverter is a really critical component in this system. We had started with a cheap inverter called a modified sine wave inverter, and then with some research we found out that motors like pure sine wave inverters. They're sometimes called induction appliances. So motors work best with pure sine wave inverters. Once we did that, we could turn both burners on simultaneously with the igniters, and there was no problem whatsoever.
Not at all.
The other inverter, we could barely get one of the burners on.
Yeah, we get the first one, and then as soon as we hit the igniter switch on the other one, it would shut off, and the inverter would beep.
As a bonus, this also runs potter's wheels. And you cannot stop it by pressing down it. It's that strong. It really does work. So you can run your potter's wheel and your kiln off a battery bank. There's a readout, which is really handy. It tells us how much voltage is coming in and how much is going out. 14.2 means that not only are we getting voltage from the battery bank, but we're also getting voltage from the solar panels. So we found that when we fired, at least partially in sunlight, we got a big benefit in terms of voltage, and we also get a big benefit in terms of depth of discharge. Am I losing you yet? Okay. So here's the surprise. This is what you want to remember. We thought that it was going to take a week to recharge the batteries. It only took a day. We fired 3 times in 3 days with this. And each time we were able to start with a fully charged battery bank. The second firing, I should add, was a little low, but we said, let's try it anyway. But there was some intermittent sunlight. We had some periods of extended sun, and it actually boosted the charge up enough that we didn't drop the discharge below 50%. It works. It really does work. So what about the big differences? So far, it sounds great, doesn't it? It's not that easy. Harley's going to talk about some of the difficulties. So yes, there's a price to pay for sustainability. So talk about that for a bit.
Wanted to show you show you this first, so that way you know it works before I get into all the hassles of it as well. So one thing about firing with oil furnace burners is that they're either on or they're off. There's not a whole lot of, well, there's really no gradual turn-ups with these. One way that we've mitigated this problem in the past was to have a preheat burner. And that just has
Kind of a dedicated burner that you use only for preheat.
Yeah, it gets up a lower temperature and then you just build upon that.
Smaller gallon per hour.
Yep, yes sir. Another thing is flame color can be really misleading. As we had mentioned before, the flames are yellow, similar to like wood firing. What we found is that when we think that we're doing a reduction atmosphere, it's really, really oxidized according to our oxyprobe. It's just not
Big
not
surprise,
accurate.
really. That was a learning curve.
Another thing is because of that, copper reds are more challenging. And as I mentioned before, the oxyprobe has really helped us overcome those challenges.
We're on track to finish that. That's a good point too. Yeah, I mean, if you're only firing oxidation glazes or you're not concerned about reduction, then that would be no problem.
You have to monitor the fuel levels to avoid total shutdowns on the kiln. With ours, we go about every 20 to 30 minutes just for quick checks. We literally walk out, make sure the line's in a good location in the tank, and then we come right back in.
We basically made every mistake you can make.
Yes.
We didn't monitor the fuel, and the hoses came out of the fuel, and they shut down the kiln, cooled it off, had to restart it. So, we can tell you how not to do it as well as how to do it.
Yes. And lastly, you have to expect spills and messes. I've ruined a solid 3 pairs of pants and shoes and
I think I
a
got
bunch of different things. It is frustrating at times.
Yeah, it is. So there's cleanup.
Yes.
The good news is you can clean it up with soap and water for the most time, or citrus-based cleaners also work well on that. And biodiesel is actually a pretty good cleaner. You can actually use biodiesel to clean gunk off stuff.
Then there's the inconvenient truth of firing with biodiesel is not easier, but it's manageable to do. As I said, it's a dirty job. You get frustrated. There's been nights where we've had to just stop kiln firings because of issues that we've had. And cold weather offers challenges with it as well. But we've made all the mistakes. So, we have an idea of what to do.
We think of it kind of like open source kiln design. You guys take that design and make it better so we can share it with everybody. And so after a while, this could be as commonplace as a soda kiln. Which you could do with this, by the way.
And this is showing our nozzle assembly with the old swirler on it. You can see that at the top there's a buildup of crud, and that really affects the combustion.
The flame pattern coming out because the air's not circulating as well, pushing through there.
What we do is we just monitor these buildups over time with each firing, and then when it's necessary, we take these components apart and clean them up.
It's not that hard.
No. This is the extended blast tube. You can see some carbon deposits on the bottom. And then this is the pump assembly. This comes off of the burner. It's really easy to take apart. If I can take it apart, anybody else can. This is the gasket that comes from the factory. It's a cork material. Biodiesel calls it the swell and fail and tear sometimes. So how we've fixed that is we've cut new gaskets out of Viton. And that's
What's Viton?
Viton is a material that's more impervious to the solvent aspects of biodiesel. Correct?
Yep.
This is 1/16 inch Viton.
The other thing is too, I should add, is that once that gasket fails, your pump stops working well. So if you see a big drop in pressure, that means the gasket's probably gone. But the Viton really does eliminate a lot of that.
Yeah, it works great. And this is the strainer that's inside the pump assembly. You can see it's a little gunky. Something that we've done to mitigate those problems as well is we put an inline strainer, and that collects any particulate that might be
Just
heading
before it
its way.
goes into the burners. That way you've caught everything you can before it goes into the burners.
Yeah, we have a main line from the fuel that's going into that inline strainer, then 2 separate lines going out to each burner. Another issue is that cold temperatures are a problem with biodiesel.
And vegetable oil.
And waste vegetable oil. Below 40 degrees, it starts to cloud, and as it gets colder and colder, it can gel. How we mitigate those problems is we store our biofuels inside. Biodiesel is not classified as a flammable liquid, so we literally keep 2 to 3 totes in the studio at all time to prepare for any firings that we might have. Another thing that you can do is when you take those fuels outside, we wrap blankets or bubble wrap around it to help maintain that temperature. And then the third thing, if you don't have the material to build yourself a solar preheater like we have, you can actually just paint your totes black and then place a clear trash bag over top of that and then put that outside in the sunlight.
It actually traps quite a bit of heat. It'll warm it up well past room temperature.
So with all those problems, why do we still do it?
Why? 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 Make sure your relationships are strong.
Yeah.
Your wife or husband or significant other may want to divorce you. Well, one of the reasons is because it's the university's job to push the envelope. Who else is going to do it? So we have to push the envelope. We have to show what the future can look like. You've probably heard the phrase, if you want to predict the future, create it. If you want to know what the future's like, why am I butchering this every time? But if you want to predict the future, create it by making the image of the future you want. So that's part of why we're doing this. We want to show it's possible.
And this is what sustainability looks like. It's not always clean. It's not always green. Sometimes it's
pretty.
brown and stainy.
Yeah, stinky.
Yeah.
And of course, to help you guys replicate this kiln, I hope that from this lecture, you guys will go to your respective places and think about making one yourself, and we'll be here to help.
And lastly, it's extremely satisfying. At the end of the night when we are frustrated and it doesn't work, after we've come back and collected our thoughts and gotten it successfully fired, it's awesome. It's way better than any kind of firing that I've done so far.
It is a good feeling. I mean, we're not contributing to the carbon problem, at least where we've reduced as much as we can. Here's a sampling of the work that, it did melt the glazes. So we encourage you to take the bull by the horns and see if you can do something like that. It'd be nice to see several new kilns pop up around the country that use biofuel. Now, we'd like to open up the floor to questions. We've got about 10 minutes. So if you want to come to the center mic.
So I saw on your kind of different chemical species list of what has been decreased that you were having issues with nitrous oxides, which seem to be a lot more reactive than like carbon dioxide or a lot of other things. Are you guys making, are you making steps towards reducing your nitrous oxides, like adding a little bit of water into the combustion or like a three-way
We haven't. I mean, it's a great question because you'd want to know, like, well, can we do better?
Yeah, well, with already having made so many steps, I don't know if this complicates it beyond adding another piece of line into
That's
it.
basically it. It adds a layer of complexity that may not be worth it in terms of return. It's 10% higher than regular diesel, and of course it's a very small percentage of all the fuel that's burned. So it seems like a reasonable offset, but I'd be open to ways to reduce that too. I mean, it's a very good question. Yay.
Just got a grant to start building a biodiesel kiln.
Excellent,
That's
great.
great.
Let us know how we can help.
Have you heard of the Tin Man kiln?
No, tell me about it.
Afterwards.
Okay.
Have you done testing at cone 6 versus how much fuel you use to get to 6 versus getting to 10?
No reason why you shouldn't be able to do this to cone 6. In fact, it should be a lot better. I mean, for all the same reasons that cone 6 works better for other fuels too. So it'd be a natural to go to cone 6 with this.
But you haven't done that yet?
I haven't done it yet, no. No reason why it shouldn't work though. What else? It's soft brick. It's the K23s. We wanted something really good for insulation. We put a blanket across the top of the arch and we put an extra blanket on the sides as well. So it's just regular soft brick for insulation.
And then we have ceramic fiber over top of that fiber blanket on the outside as well.
So yeah, try to seal it. To winter, to seal the kiln as much as possible too.
I had recently came across a video on YouTube about a man taking a TV screen that has a big magnifying lens in the front of it.
The Fresnel lens.
Yeah, and I don't know if you've got any application for that, but I've been kind of experimenting with that.
They're cool, they're really cool.
Yeah.
I mean, theoretically, you could probably focus that spot on a tank of oil and heat it up. But tell you the truth, the reflectors concentrate a huge amount of energy into that black box. I mean, you know, there's lots of ways to look at how to concentrate solar energy. Fresnel lens is one, concentrators are one. But yeah, if you can come up with something that would, you know, act as a preheater, you know, try it.
Yeah.
Have we experimented with methane? We've only been using vegetable oil and biodiesel. I have actually tanks for doing methane digesters, mostly as a demonstration project, but it wouldn't probably be sufficient in terms of cubic feet to be able to fire a kiln. You could use it maybe to, you know, to cook while you're firing, something like that. But it would scale. It's really scale. Methane does not compress well, so you can't compress it into a tank. It needs like 2,000 or 3,000 psi to compress. So you can only use it kind of at normal size, which means like a big balloon of it. So in that way, it hasn't been feasible yet for methane, unless you're doing landfill gas. Landfill gas is feasible, and there's a place in North Carolina that's done that for many, many years. The Green Energy Park, yeah, John Ellenbogen and the bunch. Oh, and also South Carolina, Green Energy Park, right? Is that the one you're talking?
Dillsboro.
Okay, in North Carolina, yeah, that's like the you know, original one on steroids. It's a huge project. It's really great. Yes.
So this kiln is a downdraft. Have you guys ever, like, what is the relation, like, that it could be used as like a cross draft too?
Cross draft will work as well. In fact, our original design was cross draft. And the reason we started out with cross draft was because we figured the flame needed more space to lengthen out and to you know, collect more oxygen and give off more BTUs. I don't see why it wouldn't work as cross draft too. It did work on our original kiln, but we just simplified it. We had a smaller space to work in when we rebuilt it. So we wanted to kind of keep it compact enough and burners from the back. But I think cross draft would work equally well.
I've been firing a waste vegetable oil kiln for the last 6 years.
Great.
In Hawaii, and I didn't go all the way green. I used propane to preheat it. It's about a 24 cubic foot updraft that I converted, built fireboxes underneath. Mm-hmm. And the biggest problem that I've had is that the veggie oil burners, which I estimate are probably around 500,000 BTUs, they melt my brick.
Are they swirlemizers or something else? Or?
They're burners that I built.
Oh, you built them?
They use those atomizers, runs on compressed air, uses those atomizers. I wasn't trying, I mean, it'd be cool if I could be 100% green, but I'm trying to make a living, so I'm just trying to save money. Fuel's really expensive in Hawaii, and I can get the veggie oil for free.
Ken McLaughlin, you know him?
No, I don't know anybody.
He was doing veggie firing in Hawaii, and he said propane was $5 a gallon.
Yeah, it's a little more than that now. Yeah. I've saved a lot of money. Anyway, what kind of, I didn't get in here in time to see your kiln design. You're putting your burners into fireboxes, yeah?
Yes, and they're putting out about 150 BTUs
150,000?
Approximately 150,000 BTUs each.
Yeah.
And that's because we're using roughly 1 gallon per hour nozzles, and the BTU content of biodiesel is 125,000 BTUs. So we're putting about 125,000 BTUs, but the nozzles are a little bit higher than what they're rated for, especially without a return line. Mm-hmm. So we're actually pumping in closer to 150,000 BTUs. Yeah. And based on Olson's book about how many BTUs you need about 300,000 BTUs to take this kiln with soft brick to bring it up to cone 10. So it's pretty convenient. I mean, we lucked out in a way in terms of the numbers. But if you wanted to drop your BTUs, you might want to try doing a furnace burner, and you could theoretically blend it with something else like kerosene, maybe 10-20% kerosene to get it thin enough to go through furnace burners.
I like my burners. My burners rock.
Well, how many are there?
Just 2.
Just 2 of them?
Yeah, I replaced 10 propane burners with 2 oil burners, and it's more than the original.
Okay.
So,
Well, was there anything else that you were curious about?
I want to know what kind of refractories you're using in your fireboxes.
Well, you know, we have long firebox because they go the length of the kiln,
Right.
and we have target bricks. Those target bricks do deform over
And
time.
what are they, 3,000 degree hard brick, what?
They're like lower than that, but they, you know, ours don't rock like yours do. I mean, with 500,000 BTUs, I mean, I would just go for a high alumina brick. You know, pay the price and get some high alumina brick for you know, anywhere where there's flame impingement, anywhere where you know you're going to be getting really, really hot heat.
Yeah.
I have melted posts with biodiesel.
Oh, easy to do.
I've melted them, turned them into soft pretzels. When we did the cross draft, that's how it worked with, we were putting in so much BTUs in a small space that the posts right over the bag wall were just twisting, so.
Right. How big are your fireboxes? The cross, you know.
Well, the openings are about 4 inches,
Right.
and they're about 3 feet long in terms, but they're pretty narrow.
Are they like 9-inch brick, one brick wide?
It's
or
4, it's like a 4.5 inch wide channel.
Do you have any idea how hot they get
Which part?
inside the fireboxes?
I don't know. I mean, it'd be interesting to put some cones there just to see. But I do know that those low-duty bricks do deform over
yeah.
time. Yeah.
Yeah, I melted a 2300 one down to slag, so I
my.
reckon mine are running about 2700.
Yeah.
And that's the thing with vegetable oil I didn't realize when I was
It's
getting into
got super power in there.
Yeah, it's
But
like-
I would just look for something high aluminum you can find, and that's
right.
that's one way to beat heat.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
Good luck, and congratulations too. That's quite an achievement.
6 years, a long time.
Yeah. Thank you all, and good luck.
Thanks,